What conspiracy theory do you believe to be true? What evidence led you to this conclusion? Doping in football/soccer. I'm 100% convinced that there is a grand conspiracy that involves top federations, leagues and even anti-doping agencies themselves. Football is the sport with the most money in it in the world, the most at stake, with players doing every conceivable scummy thing on the pitch to gain an advantage in the most players. Yet virtually no top-level professional footballer has ever been caught doping. A sport where fair play is an antiquated term, but no one ever steps over the line with doping, and it's the cleanest sport in the world. Sure. There's also Operation Puto that smells really bad when it comes to this. Operation Puto was a major anti-doping operation that scandalized cycling. Dr. Funt's laboratory was raided, and over 200 blood bags were confiscated. 70-something of them belonged to cyclists. During the trial, several witnesses were called, former clients of Funt's etc. They all confirmed that they had seen multiple stars from other sports when visiting his office for their fix. Tennis players and footballers, most prominently. Funt's himself offers the prosecution to decode his entire client list and give them all the dopers. The prosecution refuses. Then the court orders the destruction of the 130 other blood bags. Funt's also infamously said that if I talked, we, Spain, would no longer be European and world champions. Spain won €8 in the 2010 World Cup. There's also the investigations by McLaren, who released the McLaren report that banned Russia from the Olympics and athletics into doping by the Russian Football Federation. FIFA actively worked against him and refused to let him investigate when he requested to do so. Then, during the World Cup, Russia, who was in shambles before the World Cup, became the second sensation of the tournament, beating teams supposedly much stronger than them. Helen Keller's story is extremely exaggerated. Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that she and her family had found ways to communicate before Anne Sullivan came along, so it wasn't like she was completely incapable of communication prior to learning traditional sign language. But I'd also say her story post-water is under-exaggerated. At least in most media portrayals of her life, the focus is usually on her learning to communicate and going to college. Which is fine, but the true noteworthy things are the ones that don't get attention. She co-founded the ACLU, fought for workers' rights, including being on the front lines of protests and picket lines, was an advocate for equal treatment of other races at a time when most white women weren't, was a suffragist and birth control advocate, and, obviously, worked tirelessly to ensure that disabled people were treated fairly. She was actually a target of FBI surveillance for most of her life due to her radical ideas. Some organizations, either public or private, spy on us through the cameras in our mobile devices. Evidence: Mark Zuckerberg keeps the camera lenses taped over on his computer and some other devices. The government pushes out tons of conspiracy theories so that the real ones don't stand out. Like the episode of The Office, where Michael let slip that Stanley was cheating, so he made up rumors about everybody to hide it. I don't have any evidence, but it seems hard to deny. Denver International Airport is a front for some weird Illuminati/New World Order stuff. As a local, I can confirm that Dyer is a massive shipping hub and most of the airport isn't accessible to the public and travelers, including several miles around the facility. But I also believe what a lot of the other locals buy into, and that the airport is a secure transportation hub for high-level criminals, military and civilian. We've got some of the most high-security facilities to house people long-term in the state and a bunch of high-level military operations, property, and command centers here, plus the Air Force Academy. The US intentionally sunk the USS Maine so they could declare war on the Spanish, who were in possession of Cuba in the past. The Spanish had absolutely no issues with the Brits and did actively try to avoid them, hence why they had, if I'm not wrong, not a single colony on Africa. But somehow a US warship sinks pretty near Cuba at the same time the US declared intention to take Cuba as is, and boom, war happens over the territory. Edit: to clarify, the part about this that's the conspiracy is that the US sunk the USS Maine themselves, sabotaged it or something. The part where they blamed Spain on it and went to war is true, but the blame over the Maine sinking is the piece where conspirators come together. I hope this doesn't get buried, and I hope nobody has said anything related, but I have a theory that phone manufacturers are colluding with service providers to make the Wi-Fi receptors on phones intentionally shitty. I will be sitting in spots for hours legitimately right near the router and see that my Wi-Fi goes in and out and the LTE takes over so that my data starts being eaten into. The service providers stand to gain from people being forced into purchasing increased data plans or paying for overages. HBO has paid George Martin not to release the next book until the GOTY series wraps up. I figure those books weren't even popular outside of niche readers until the show came out. People will still buy the books when they eventually release, so why not take a big old fat paycheck to sit on them? It's more like Martin is lazy and has been riding the royalty checks because he is really unsure how to finish the books. Now that the show is ending, he can see how one of the endings he was exploring will be received by fans, and if there is a lot of displeasure then he can change it. Also, I believe him and Patrick Rothfuss have a bet to see which one caves first to publish and publishes their next book first. There absolutely is a cabal of super wealthy who control the world. I don't claim to know the nature of it, whether it's stonemasons, Illuminati, Zionists or Rothschilds. It's irrelevant. It absolutely makes perfect sense that a handful of super powerful people would come together to make sure they maintain their collective power. When I lived in Ottawa, Canada, the Bilderberg group met there. They occupied a business park plus hotel we have here. I went to check it out, but couldn't get past private security. It's not unusual for dignitaries to visit the city, close roads and venues for security reasons. No one can claim to know who exactly they are or what they talk about, but it makes 100% sense that the super wealthy run the world. Like, how could they not get together and coordinate? They literally have all the money in the world. Call them whatever you want, but influential, well-connected, and secretive puppet masters are absolutely a fact of modern life. Free Britney. She never needed a conservatorship. Her abusive dad and manager saw a way to get money, while the paparazzi and Sam Lufty coordinated trauma to gaslight her. She expressed interest in being evaluated to get out of this BS, and is now being locked up until she behaves. Actual quote from a paralegal who worked at the law firm running this. She isn't legally allowed to check herself into or out of a facility. One of her conservators has to arrange it. Also, her taking me time post was very unlike her normal memes and words and emojis. Good source. Britney's Gram podcast. The last 3 to 4 eps dive deep. I care about this BC. I believe the crazy woman trope is used to control women. And if one of the most famous people on the planet can suffer this with no advocates, legally she doesn't get to have a therapist or lawyer that doesn't first represent her dad's wishes, shines a light on the dangers of corrupt guardianships. I really believe there are very few actual conspiracies. Mostly because the ones you read about are so complex and convoluted they would never accomplish anything. However, I do believe in the theory that segregation in America and the following war on drugs were a conspiracy to keep poor white people from voting along the same lines as poor black people. The goal is clear: keep them apart so they can't talk about their common problems. This could lead then to vote against the system holding them down economically. Every video buffering is by sections to make us believe we need more bandwidth, causing tech unsavvy people to pay more for their ICE package to have their videos download faster. We used to be able to let videos to buffer until the end, but now you can't, and it's irritating that you need to get disrupted for buffering till it is to save bandwidth. I still want to think of it as a conspiracy cause I don't want my video buffer every 3 minutes. I probably have shitty internet. Big grocer owns media companies and the Weather Channel. Every damn year of my 23-year life, every single winter, it's like every 2 weeks, guys, there's gonna be a huge snowstorm, so make sure you go to the store and pick up some food, especially non-perishable food, just in case. And nearly every damn time without fail, that 12 to 15 inch snowstorm becomes a 3-inch dusting the night before. Tee-hee. The warm air from the Gulf miraculously came up to Ohio out to nowhere for the 1000th time, so the snowstorm won't be bad. I'm onto you, Kroger, Meja, Walmart, and especially you, Aldi. No one would expect Aldi. They get the news and Weather Channel to make it sound like a horrid storm, to sell food at a quicker rate, and then conveniently say the night before, that the model shifted and we're not gonna get hit. Various governments are responsible for the creation or releasing and distribution of certain illegal and dangerous drugs such as grade F heroin, spice, K2, crocodile. Kill the worthless population that uses these drugs, redistribute the taxpayer dollars, those frequenting hospitals, rehabs, mental health, jails/prisons, collecting unemployment, and using low-cost housing. Blame everything on the people doing the drugs, not the people behind the curtain pulling the strings. As a nurse, I see the synthetic creations that are becoming more and more popular, and I have a hard time believing Billy, who didn't finish 8th, just threw some shit in a bucket one day, created something cheap or free to test they craved after one use, but usually killed them by the 3rd try. It continued to be talked about in the drug community and how dangerous it was, but everyone wanted to try, and they did, and they suffered. I have seen patient after patient tell me how dangerous these drugs are becoming, but they know a guy that says it's the best and most pure, and they will give them a free sample. I usually don't see them again, but in the paper obituary, I have seen a big college freshman quarterback go from a healthy star athlete having a good time at a party to a person with the mental capacity of a 4-year-old. This large man put his mother in the hospital for a long time because she tried to tell him he couldn't have a cookie before dinner. He wanted that cookie and he did what he wanted to get it. It's not exactly a conspiracy theory because we know some of it for certain, but I believe the reason older generations had higher rates of domestic and interpersonal violence and so often equated masculinity with violence was due in part to exposure to lead and fuel, which then got into the air, especially for those who worked in industrial jobs and with heavy machinery. Lead poisoning can also lead to depression, which is then self-medicated with alcohol, which makes the lead toxicity symptoms worse. Since lead was removed from gasoline, there's much less lead in the air and most people have much less exposure, and that's part of why violent crime rates are in more or less consistent decline. I believe that human civilization may have gotten as advanced as we are now in the distant past. First, anatomically modern humans have been around for like 300,000 years. Civilization, from the earliest settlement we know of to today, is maybe 20,000 years old. In short, there's absolutely plenty of time to go from Sumerians to Americans nearly 10 times over in the time span between the first modern humans and Sumerians. And given that there's nothing unusual about the humans who built Sumer. Second, there are lots of legends about human civilization being destroyed by angry gods, usually because of humans behaving badly. The Greeks had a story like that, the Bible, the Hopi, the Zoroastrians. Just about any place where there's a record, you can find history of and often prophecies of a catastrophe that ends civilization, and more often than not, caused by human hubris. Third, there are all kinds of anomalies in history. Egypt has model airplanes. Indian scripture has vimanas that sound a lot like airplanes or spacecraft. There's the Piraeus map that shows Antarctica before it had been discovered, and it's accurate. These things don't make sense unless you have people understanding technology near our own level before us. Donald Glover's performance is going to suck in The Lion King, 2019. Don't get me wrong, I love Donald Glover. He is an extremely talented actor and singer, but I don't think they cast him because he was the right fit for Simba's model. I think they cast him for name recognition. It is very suspicious that we've had 2 trailers at this point and we have yet to hear him speak. I think they may be trying to hide his performance. This evidence is not objective in the slightest, but I want you to go to the trailers and look at adult Simba, then listen to Donald Glover in any of his previous roles or even in just an interview. His voice simply does not look like it will fit well with the realistic CGI lion model they have chosen. The Roswell incident was actually a high-altitude balloon carrying Japanese researchers who had discovered the jet stream, but weren't fully aware of the consequences of extremely high altitude. So they suffocated, their eyes bulged out of their heads, and their balloon eventually crashed in Roswell. This explains the smaller framed humanoid beings with large eyes, strange writing on the destroyed craft, and other nuances about the case. The government covered it up because they didn't want the public worrying that the Japanese, so shortly after WWII, had possibly found a way to send things deep into US territory, possibly bombs or invasion of people undetected. We do know the Japanese had been experimenting with sending bombs over using balloons and the jet stream as well. So I just figure, what's more likely? Aliens, or the above theory? You probably think that Shia LaBeouf is a real person. Hell, you've seen his movies. You've heard about his wild shenanigans. Even suggesting that he might not exist seems absolutely ludicrous. Here's the thing, though. Shia LaBeouf is as real as Daenerys Targaryen or Barney the dinosaur. Back in 2001, actor Louis Stevens was just an up-and-coming child star on the Disney Channel. It was manufactured stardom, of the sort that we've seen from entities like Britney Spears or Justin Timberlake, but it had the potential to go a long way. Stevens, however, had other ideas, so he invented the persona of Shia LaBeouf. He chose the name because it means praise God for the beef in the original Gaulish, and his stated intention with the character was to have it be a caricature of fame, with meat or the beef being a representation of both wealth and influence. Other actors have done similar things, of course. Everyone is familiar with Sacha Baron Cohen's Ali G or Borat, for instance, and surprisingly few people realize that Larry the Cable Guy is a character played by Daniel Whitney, who developed the fake southern accent he uses by meshing the Georgian and Texan accents of his college roommates. The thing is, there's still plenty of available evidence for those folks' real identities. When Stevens created Shia LaBeouf, however, he went as far as to hire reputation editors and public image consultants to erase any hints of who he really is. In fact, if you were to research Louis Stevens nowadays, you'd actually find references to him being a character played by Shia LaBeouf. It's an incredibly subtle piece of meta commentary, I'm sure you'll agree. Anyway, in recent years, the internet has helped keep Shia LaBeouf alive in ways that Stevens couldn't have predicted. While it's true that he has been credited as the character in everything he has done since adopting the pseudonym, the vast amount of media dedicated to the fabricated entity has done far more. For example, many people like to reference the song about Shia LaBeouf, sung by Rob Cantor, in which a standard day in the fictional actor's life is detailed, or the infamous Just Do It clip that went viral some time ago. Stevens has recently stated that he might retire the character soon, of course, but for now, the people who realize that Shia LaBeouf is a lie created by an actor and expanded by the internet are in the significant minority. TL. Dr. Shia LaBeouf is not a real person, but the internet has convinced you that he is. I believe the US military went to Afghanistan in order to seize control of the poppy fields, and instead of destroying them, they manufactured black tar and other forms of heroin and sent it back to the States. I have several friends that were Marines in Afghanistan and they've confirmed these suspicions. The drugs got worse after being in Afghanistan, not better or more contained. The USA military is the biggest cartel in the world. Stanley Kubrick was murdered by Hollywood elitists because he exposed the pedophilia ring in Hollywood. In his film Eyes Wide Shut there was a deleted scene where a cult supposedly raped and sacrificed a child. The studio forces Kubrick to remove the scene, but he refused. Soon after the film came out, they murdered Kubrick. They cut the film and released it. There's a reason Kubrick casts Tom Cruise in the film. He and Kubrick were involved in the cult and satanic parties. When asked about Kubrick in interviews, Tom Cruise gets very uncomfortable and jumpy. There was another cutscene where Kubrick revealed the real names of the people in the cult. The Hollywood elitists killed him for this scene. He refused to cut out of the film as well.